I knew the homeowners association had built their tennis courts in the wrong place the moment the roller crossed the grass behind my house. Valerie Kincaid, our association president, only smiled and told me I should be grateful the neighborhood was finally getting an upgrade. 3 weeks later, the new surface started to crack. Dark water seeped up along the fence line. The smell reached the clubhouse on the morning of the opening tournament. Valerie kept blaming my house, right up until a county sport utility vehicle rolled to a stop at the curb. The health inspector stepped out, looked at the courts, looked at her, and asked one question: who authorized building on this drain field? If you enjoy watching an association dig its own hole and fall into it, subscribe to the channel and stay for the reversal. My name is Desmond Avery. I am 47 years old, and 6 years ago I bought the last house on Juniper Hollow Drive, right where the pavement gives up and turns into a gravel apron and a stand of pines. What sold me was not the house, it was the land. My lot runs almost 1.25 acres, nearly 3 times what anyone else in Briar Glen Estates got, because my house was framed and finished 11 years before the association ever expanded its boundary lines up my end of the road. I was the odd parcel that got swallowed, and I liked being the odd parcel. Behind the house there is a wide open stretch of lawn that slopes gently toward the tree line. There is a reason that stretch holds no beds and no borders, and the reason sits about 30 inches under the surface. That stretch of ground is my septic drain field. The county file on my address holds the location of the tank, the distribution box, the laterals running out in parallel rows, the approved disposal area, and a mandatory reserve zone set aside for the day the original field wears out. Every one of those items is drawn, dated, stamped, and recorded. Nothing may be built above them. Nothing heavy may be driven across them. That is not my personal preference. That is the permit. I spent 19 years working on water and wastewater systems before my knees told me to get off job sites, and now I consult from a desk in my spare bedroom. So I understood exactly what I owned, and I understood why the flat green rectangle behind my house looked, to everyone else in Briar Glen, like wasted space. The association had wanted a recreation area near the clubhouse for years. Then Valerie Kincaid won the presidency with a campaign built on one promise, repeated at every meeting and printed on every flyer. She was going to make Briar Glen the premier community in the county. She was 52, always immaculate, and she spoke to me from the first day like I had wandered in through a gap in the fence. Her first project was 2 premium tennis courts, lit, fenced, and finished with a spectator terrace. I did not care in the slightest until the concept drawing went out to every household, and I saw that one corner of the layout sat squarely on the grass behind my kitchen window. So I did what a reasonable man does. I wrote her a polite email. I told her the area was not only inside my parcel, it also contained a septic system registered with the county, and that no structure could legally be placed above it. I attached nothing yet, because I assumed nothing would be needed. Her answer came back in one line, 11 words long. We'll let the professionals determine that. I read it twice, and I understood that she had never intended to listen. 2 weeks later, I was standing at my counter with a cup of coffee when I heard a diesel engine idling somewhere behind the house. I set the cup down, walked to the window, and watched a bulldozer come off the clubhouse access lane and turn straight into my back lawn. I did not shout. Men who shout on job sites get described later as aggressive, and I have been that description before. I put on my boots, walked out to the edge of the grass with my hands in plain sight, and asked for whoever was running the work. A man in his 30s in a safety vest came over, introduced himself as Graham Pike, project manager for the contractor, and I asked him one thing: "Do you have a survey?" He said, "Of course," and handed me a site plan on a clipboard. I saw the problem before I finished reading the title block. The boundary line on that drawing was not a legal survey line. There was no surveyor's seal, no bearings, no monument references. What Graham had in his hand was an old landscaping plan for the subdivision, the kind of thing drawn to show where shrubs and irrigation heads should go, and on that drawing the whole area behind my house was labeled with 2 words, open green space. Somebody had taken a decorative document and treated it like a deed. I stood there in the wet grass, holding a clipboard, realizing that a $280,000 project had been laid out on a picture of a garden. Valerie arrived 9 minutes later in a black sport utility vehicle she parked across the access lane. She got out annoyed, not curious, and the first thing she wanted to know was why my conversation had stopped the machines. I explained it plainly, the way I would have explained it to a client. The ground you are on belongs to my parcel. Beneath it is an active septic drain field. Heavy equipment compacts the soil column, and compaction destroys the ability of that soil to absorb and treat effluent. An engineered court base placed on top will seal the surface and change every drainage path underneath it. Once that happens, the damage cannot be undone with a rake. She let me finish. Then she smiled the way people smile at a child explaining a rule they have invented. "Desmond," she said, "I know you like to fix things around your house yourself, and that's admirable, but this is a project worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. We have professionals." She did not say the rest. She did not have to. In her mouth I was a man who tinkers with pipes on weekends, standing between a real community and its future. I asked her a direct question instead of arguing. Where is the septic clearance permit for construction over a disposal field? She changed the subject to the timeline. I asked again. She told me the association held a recreational easement over the rear portion of my property and that the board had every right to improve it. I knew what that easement said because I had read it before I closed on the house. It allowed the association to maintain the boundary fencing and the stormwater swale along the outer edge of my parcel. Maintain. Nothing about excavation, nothing about paving, nothing about permanent structures. But arguing with Valerie on my own lawn would only produce her version of events, so I stopped talking and started documenting. I photographed the bulldozer, the contractor's sign, the plate on the roller, the excavation line, the stripped sod, and the timestamp on my own phone in the same frame. Then I went inside and sent a formal written demand that work in the rear area cease immediately, addressed to her and copied to the management company that administered our association. Her reply arrived that afternoon, and it contained no engineering, no permit number, and no willingness. Any further interference with HOA contractors may result in legal action. I read it twice, the same way I had read her first message, and I felt the thing in my chest settle into something colder and much more patient. I created a folder on my computer and named it for what it was going to become. Briar Glen, tennis courts. Into it went the concept drawing, the landscaping plan photographed on Graham's clipboard, my emails, her emails, and 41 photographs. 19 years in this field taught me one lesson above all others. You do not win these fights on the day they start. You win them later, on paper, with dates. After that, the work moved with a speed that told me everything about Valerie's real deadline. She wanted a ribbon cutting before the Briar Glen Autumn Tennis Tournament. Excavation ran through the weekend. Trucks came in with aggregate on Monday morning. Meanwhile, I hired Elliot Shaw, an independent septic engineer with 31 years in the county and a reputation for writing reports that lawyers hate to read on the losing side. He pulled the file himself rather than take my word for anything, walked the property with a locator, and then stood at the fence with his hands on his hips for a long minute. "If this file is accurate," he said, "and it is, they are building almost directly on top of a functioning disposal field." Then he told me the part I already knew and needed a client to hear anyway. Nothing dramatic was going to happen that week. A drain field does not explode, it suffocates. The truck traffic compresses the soil pores that do the actual treatment work. The stone base changes how water moves and where it goes. Some laterals crush outright, some deform and hold standing effluent, and the rest of the field starts accepting less and less volume each day. The tank fills faster. Pressure works backward through the distribution box. Slow drains come first, then odor, then surfacing. He wrote all of it down, dated it, and put it in a preliminary letter on his own letterhead, which turned out to be the most valuable single page in this entire story. Elliot also gave me one instruction I followed exactly. Do not dig anything up yourself, because the moment you disturb their work, they get to argue you caused the failure. Let them build it, and let them build the evidence for you. So I did nothing physical. I logged the flow behavior in my own house every morning, photographed the same 3 angles at the same hour, and recorded every delivery truck by plate and load. My folder grew from 41 photographs to more than 300. And every one of them carried a date I did not have to defend. While I was compiling, Valerie was campaigning. At the September Association meeting, she stood at the front of the clubhouse with the concept rendering on an easel and told a room of about 60 homeowners that one resident was trying to hold the entire community back. She did not use my name in the sentence. She used it in the pause afterward by looking directly at me while nobody spoke. Some residents are simply uncomfortable with progress, she said, and would rather not see a tennis court from a window. Heads turned. I felt the room decide something about me in about 4 seconds, and I understood that if I stood up angry, they would keep that decision forever. So I stood up calm. I said good evening, thanked her for the update, and asked a single question. Valerie, could you show everyone the septic clearance permit for construction over a registered disposal field? Nobody breathed. She said the permitting was in process with the county and that these things take time. I said thank you, and then asked the second question, which I had been holding for 3 weeks. If the permit is still in process, why has construction already been underway for 19 days? She said the discussion had run past its allotted time and moved on to the landscaping budget. 2 board members looked at each other. That was the first crack, and it was not in the asphalt. Afterward, in the parking lot, she passed close enough to me that nobody else could hear her, and she said 8 words that told me exactly who I was dealing with. You really should learn when to stop pushing. Not you're wrong. Not I'll look into it. Stop pushing. It stopped being about a tennis court in that moment and became about a man who would not be managed. I drove the 400 yards home, sat in my driveway for a while, and then went inside and typed her sentence into a document with the date and time, because contempt sounds very different in a hearing room than it does in a parking lot. The system began answering for me 9 days later. The upstairs toilet emptied slowly, then hesitated at the end of the cycle. The kitchen drain developed a low gurgle when the washing machines charged, the sound of air being pushed back through a line that has nowhere else to send it. Then, on a Thursday with no rain in a week, a patch of grass near the fence went soft and stayed soft. Not wet from the top, wet from below. I called Elliot. He walked the same line he had walked before, crouched over the soft area, pressed his palm into the turf, and stood up with an expression I had seen on inspectors at the end of long careers. They are killing your system slowly, he said, and the last lift of asphalt goes down tomorrow morning. That night I decided to give Valerie one final chance, not because I thought she would take it, but because I wanted a record showing she had been offered one. I built a single email, and I built it like an exhibit. Attached to it were the original septic permit from the county, the stamped boundary survey I had ordered and paid $900 for, the recorded drain field map, the recorded easement language with the maintenance clause highlighted, 30 selected photographs with timestamps, and Elliot Shaw's preliminary letter on letterhead. The body of the message ran 4 sentences. Construction is occurring over an active septic disposal area inside my parcel. Failure is already beginning. Stop work before the system fails completely. All costs from this point forward are documented. I sent it to Valerie, to all 5 board members individually rather than through the board address, to the property management company, and to Graham Pike at the contractor. That last recipient was the one that mattered, and Graham called me before 8 the next morning. His questions were themselves an answer, and one sentence in them changed the whole structure of the case. "Mr. Avery, I have never seen any of this," I asked him carefully, because I did not want to lead a witness I might need later, whether he had received a septic map with the site plan. He said no. He said the plan came from the president's office, and he had been told the parcel questions were resolved. Valerie intervened within the hour. She sent a message to the board and to Graham stating that Association Council had reviewed all documentation regarding the rear boundary, that a resident's private opinions were not a legal determination, and that any delay would expose the association to contractor claims for standby time. I have thought about that message many times. Nowhere in it did she say the drain field did not exist, or that my survey was wrong. She simply moved the conversation from facts to money and dared 5 volunteers to be the ones who stopped a project. Nobody stopped it. The paving crew arrived at 7:40 that morning, and by noon the last lift went down over my number 2 and number 3 laterals. Then it got fast and glossy. Fence, windscreens, net posts, painted lines, benches bolted down. On Friday they energized the light poles, and from my kitchen window at 9 at night my back lawn looked like a stadium. The following week, the association newsletter went out to every household with the headline in capital letters, "A New Era for Briar Glen," above a photograph of Valerie standing at the center service line in a cream blazer with her arms slightly open, presenting the $280,000 amenity to the community. I looked at that photograph for a long time, and I felt no anger at all. I saved it to the folder. It was the best thing anybody had given me yet, because it put her, by name and by choice, standing on top of the thing. 2 days after the newsletter, the downstairs toilet stopped draining altogether. Not slow. Stopped. Elliot came out with a probe and a pressure gauge, opened my tank lid, and showed me a liquid level 9 inches above the outlet invert. "That is hydraulic failure," he said. "The field is no longer dispersing at any meaningful rate." He estimated that 1/3 of the disposal area had been rendered inert, and that my reserve area, the ground legally set aside for a future replacement field, now sat under 6 inches of aggregate and 2 lifts of asphalt. I asked what it cost me to keep living in my own house. He gave me a number: $425 every 11 days for emergency pumping indefinitely, or wastewater comes back through my floor drain. I laughed, out loud, alone, at the mailbox, in a way that probably worried my neighbor across the road, because Valerie Kincaid, in her own letterhead, with her own signature, had just created the single best document in my file. Every previous denial had rested on the claim that nothing was wrong. That notice was an official written statement by the association that a sanitary odor problem existed immediately adjacent to their brand new amenity, dated, signed, and mailed. She had spent 4 months telling everyone there was no issue, and then she put the issue in writing herself and charged me for it. I did not pay the fine. I did not appeal it either. I scanned it at 600 dots per inch. Then I built one more package: the permit, the survey, the recorded drain field map, my full email chain with Valerie including her legal threat and her review claim, Graham's statement that he had never received a septic map, Elliot's preliminary and follow-up letters, the pumping invoices, 368 photographs indexed by date, the newsletter photograph of Valerie standing at center court, and her violation notice. I filled out a citizen complaint form, attached the package, and filed it with the county environmental health department on a Thursday afternoon. Then I made dinner. That was the whole of my revenge, a form and an attachment. The association spent the next 11 days building an event. Valerie wanted the opening tournament to be a showcase, and she ran it like a product launch. A vinyl banner went up across the clubhouse porch, 30 feet wide, carrying the same slogan as the newsletter in 3-foot letters. She hired a caterer from 2 towns over and ordered custom draw sheets with the association crest at the top. 64 names were on those sheets, all of it beautifully organized, and all of it scheduled to happen directly above a failing wastewater disposal field. Underneath the paint and the powder coat, the ground kept doing what ground does. I noticed the first crack on court number 2 on a Sunday. It ran maybe 5 inches hairline, near the doubles alley on the side closest to my fence. By Wednesday, it was closer to 4 feet and had opened enough that I could see the aggregate below. By the weekend, a second crack met it, and the surface between them had dropped maybe 3/4 of an inch, enough to see if you crouched and looked along it. Graham noticed too. He came out with a straight edge and a marker, laid it across the low area, and stood there for a long time without writing anything down. That edge ran along my fence line, and on the Thursday before the tournament it began to weep. A gray sheen appeared where the asphalt met the graded shoulder, maybe 11 feet long, no more than a 1/4 inch deep, and it did not dry. Grass in that strip went dark and slick. The smell arrived on the afternoon breeze, and I knew it before I was within 20 yards of it, that particular sour weight that anybody who has worked in this field carries in their memory permanently. I photographed it at 2 in the afternoon and again at 6. I did not touch it. I stood on my side of the fence, in my own yard, and I let it exist. Valerie came out at 7 with 2 board members and a landscaping contractor. She looked at the seep for perhaps 4 seconds, and then she turned around and delivered her verdict loudly enough that I could hear every word from my porch. Mr. Avery's outdated septic system is damaging community property. One of the board members glanced my way, and I walked down to the fence, because that sentence deserved an answer with witnesses. I said, evenly, "Your community property is sitting on top of my septic system." She told me the association would be pursuing damages for harm caused by failed maintenance on my part. I asked whether she would like me to forward every email I had sent her before a single shovel touched that ground, along with the engineer's letter she had received in July. There was a pause. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, and in it I watched her calculate not whether she was wrong, but whether anyone present could prove it. Then she chose the worst available option. She turned to the landscaping contractor and instructed him to bring in topsoil and hardwood mulch, spread 8 to 10 inches deep along the entire fence side of Court 2, and grade it before Saturday morning. Cover it. Not test it, not report it, not call the county. Cover it, so that 64 players and their families could stand on a tournament surface above raw effluent while she gave a speech about a new era. Graham Pike said no. He said it in front of everyone, and he said it in a way that made it very clear he had already spoken to someone about liability. He said his crew would not place fill over a suspected sanitary discharge, that his firm would not touch the area until the source was identified by a licensed party, and that if the association wanted concealment work performed, they would need to hire somebody else and put the request in writing. Valerie's face went smooth in a way I recognized from years of meetings, the look of a person who has just discovered that the people carrying out her decisions have their own licenses to protect. She said she would handle it herself. The mulch never came. Saturday morning came up clear and about 71 degrees. Cars began arriving at 8. By 9, the clubhouse lawn held maybe 130 adults with paper cups, kids running the perimeter, a caterer setting out trays, and both courts full of people in white swinging rackets under that 30-foot banner. From my side of the fence it looked genuinely lovely, and for a few minutes I felt something I had not expected, which was a kind of grief for a neighborhood that would have gotten a nice thing if one person had been capable of reading a document. Then the breeze shifted out of the southwest, across the seep, and directly through the entire event. I watched it move through the crowd like a wave. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People turned their heads and then turned their bodies. A woman with 2 children picked up her bag and moved 30 feet to the far side of the terrace without saying anything to anyone. Someone near the net asked, loudly enough to carry, what that smell was. Valerie was at the folding table with her notes in her hand, and she gave the answer she had committed to months earlier and could no longer escape. It's a minor drainage issue on the adjacent lot. We're addressing it. She actually said the words adjacent lot, pointing at my house, in front of 130 of my neighbors. And then a white sport utility vehicle came up the clubhouse access lane and stopped at the gate, and every conversation on that terrace found something new to do. The county seal was on the driver's door with the department name beneath it in blue block letters, Environmental Health. The woman who got out was about 40, in a field jacket with an identification badge clipped at the collar, carrying a tablet in a rubber case and a leather folder under her arm. I knew the name before she said it, because I had spent 19 years in this business, and she had signed permits I had reviewed. Marissa Boone. She closed the door without hurrying, looked at the fence line, looked at the crowd, and walked through the gate onto the terrace. Valerie went to meet her with her hand already out and her chin up, and she did the thing she always did, the thing that had worked her entire adult life. I'm Valerie Kincaid, president of Briar Glen. Marissa shook the hand once, briefly, and answered without any warmth or any rudeness at all. I need the property owner. Valerie said she could speak for the association on any matter concerning the amenity. Marissa repeated it exactly, the same 6 words in the same tone, the way a person repeats a required question. I need the property owner. I set my coffee on the fence rail, walked around through the gate, and said the 3 words I had been waiting 4 months to say in front of witnesses. That would be me. Valerie turned so fast her notes came apart in her hand. Marissa did not react to her at all. She opened the folder, and what came out of it was not an accusation. It was arithmetic, the recorded septic permit for my address, listing tank, distribution box, 4 laterals, primary disposal area, and mandatory reserve. Current parcel map from the assessor. My stamped boundary survey, which she had already obtained from the county rather than taking mine, and a georeferenced aerial from 6 weeks earlier showing the new construction. She laid them in sequence on a white tablecloth between a tray of pastries and a stack of draw sheets, and she asked me to identify the fence line. I did. Then she turned the tablet toward Valerie and me together, and she walked the overlay. Court number 1 intruded 14 feet into the required setback around the disposal area. The southern 2/3 of court number 2 sat directly above the primary field, over the 2nd and 3rd laterals, and the entire reserve area, the ground that legally guaranteed I could replace my system when it aged out, was under the light pole footings and the spectator pad. She asked for the construction permit. Valerie produced one from a folder with visible confidence, and that permit was real. It authorized recreational facility improvements on the association's common parcel, which was the wrong parcel, and it carried no environmental health clearance for work over a septic system because no such clearance had ever been requested. Marissa asked who had prepared the site plan submitted with that application. Valerie said the association's design consultant. Marissa asked Graham the same question, and Graham, standing in a safety vest at a tournament he had been invited to as a guest, said clearly, the plan was provided to us by the association president's office. Marissa asked him whether he had been given the septic map or the recorded survey at any point before or during construction. He said no. She asked whether he had requested boundary verification. He said yes twice in writing, and that he had been told the matter was resolved by counsel. Marissa wrote 3 lines and did not look up. That was when Valerie made her choice. She stepped forward and said, in a voice pitched for the crowd rather than the inspector, that the board had acted in good faith, and that nobody on the board had any knowledge of a septic field in that location. I did not say anything. I took my phone out of my jacket, opened the folder, and handed it to Marissa Boone with the first email already on the screen. Sent to Valerie Kincaid, 26 days before the first machine arrived. Subject line, septic drain field, rear parcel. Marissa read it, checked the header detail, and asked me to send the whole chain to her department address, which I did standing there, in about 40 seconds, over the Clubhouse network. Then she read the rest of it out loud in pieces, just factually, the way an inspector builds a record. Second email, with the recorded map attached, the stamped survey, Elliott Shaw's engineering letter, received in July, the written stop work demand. Valerie's reply threatening legal action against interference with contractors. The association's own violation notice, dated 3 weeks before this morning, asserting an offensive odor at the community amenity. When she finished, she looked up and asked one question. "Miss Kincaid, did you receive these documents?" Valerie said, "I receive a very large volume of email." Marissa said, "That was not my question," and then she waited, and Valerie stood in front of 130 of her neighbors and did not answer it. Marissa spent 20 minutes along the fence side of court, too, with a probe, a sample kit, and a camera. She collected 2 liquid samples, photographed the seep and the cracking, and then issued an immediate closure order for both courts and the spectator pad, effective on the spot, on grounds of potential public contact with untreated wastewater. No use, no access, no exceptions, pending investigation and remediation approval. A field technician arrived within the hour and taped orange notices to the gate, the fence, and both entrances. The tournament was canceled at 11:20 in the morning, with 64 names on custom draw sheets. The image stayed with everyone who was there, and I think it did more to change that neighborhood than anything I said in a meeting. Valerie Kincaid standing on the clubhouse terrace in her cream blazer, with a caterer packing trays behind her and a 30-foot banner reading "A New Era for Briar Glen" hanging above her head, while a county technician in gloves taped a closure notice at eye level on the gate she had cut the ribbon on 9 days earlier. People began carrying folding chairs back to their cars without being asked. Nobody spoke to her. 2 board members left together, talking quietly, and neither one of them looked back. Before Marissa left, she said something to me that I had not anticipated, and it kept me up that night. "Closing the courts," she said, "is step 1 and the easy part. The harder question is who the county holds responsible for restoring a permitted septic system and a protected disposal area that no longer function. Because the system serves my house, and under county code the property owner is obligated to maintain a functioning system. That obligation does not evaporate because somebody else broke it. She was not threatening me. She was warning me. The bill was going to land somewhere, and if I could not prove causation cleanly, it was going to land on me." The estimate came in 9 days later from the independent engineer the county required, and it was worse than I expected. Restoration meant saw cutting and removing roughly 11,000 square feet of asphalt. Removing the base, the geotextile, the light pole footings, and the concrete spectator pad. Excavating to expose all 4 laterals and the distribution box. Replacing crushed and deformed pipe. Then the part that costs real money. Decompacting and rebuilding the soil profile, because you cannot simply loosen 40 years of engineered absorption capacity back into existence. New media, new laterals across a redesigned field, a re-established reserve area, and a full county inspection before anyone could flush a toilet in my house without a truck in the driveway. The range ran from $160,000 to $210,000. Valerie changed strategy the moment she saw that number. She stopped denying the drain field existed. Instead, at the special board session convened to address the closure order, she argued that the association had been misled by incomplete county records. that the courts themselves were undamaged and merely required drainage remediation, and that responsibility for restoring a private septic system belonged, as a matter of code, to the private owner. Then she made the argument she must have believed was clever. Mr. Avery's system is the source of the contamination. He is a contributing party. Any settlement must reflect his proportional responsibility for the discharge on association property. That is, when I hired Nathan Cole, a real estate attorney in the county seat, who read my folder in one sitting without saying a word. When he finished, he closed the laptop and told me the association's position was not merely weak, it was the worst possible position they could have taken, because their own conduct had eliminated every defense that might have protected them. Ignorance was gone, because I had provided notice in writing 26 days before construction. Good faith reliance on records was gone, because I had provided the records themselves, including the stamped survey and an engineer's letter. Reasonable care was gone, because they continued paving after receiving a technical report describing imminent failure and after their own contractor requested boundary verification twice. And then Nathan went at the easement, which had been Valerie's shield from the first morning. He pulled the recorded instrument, read the granting language aloud, and it took 11 words to end the argument. The easement conveyed the right to enter and maintain perimeter fencing and the stormwater swale. It did not convey the right to excavate, to pave, or to erect permanent structures and lighting. It did not convey any right whatsoever to alter, cover, or impair septic infrastructure, and it contained an express clause preserving the underlying owner's use of the surface. The association had not exceeded its easement by a technicality. It had performed an act of construction on land where it held nothing but a maintenance right. The emergency homeowners meeting was set for a Tuesday evening, and the clubhouse was fuller than I had ever seen it. Something like 110 people, standing along the back wall, some of them owners I had never met in 6 years. Valerie chaired it, still in the chair, still holding the gavel, and she opened by framing the entire matter as an attempt by one resident to make the community pay for his private plumbing. "Mr. Avery," she said, "wants your assessments to fund the replacement of a system on his own land." I let her finish the whole thing because the most effective answer to a confident falsehood is to let it be fully stated first. Then I asked for the floor, and the interim vice president gave it to me, and Nathan connected my laptop to the clubhouse projector. I put up 3 documents, and I did not editorialize once. Exhibit 1, my email dated 26 days before construction, addressed to Valerie Kincaid, stating that the rear area contained a registered septic disposal field and could not be built upon. Exhibit 2, the recorded county drain field map and my stamped survey, sent to her 14 days before construction. Exhibit 3, my formal stop work demand, sent on the first day machines entered my property, copied to the management company, every header visible, every date legible from the back wall. Then I put up the 4th slide, which was her reply. At 400% magnification, one sentence filling a screen 10 feet wide. Any further interference with HOA contractors may result in legal action. I read it once, in a flat voice, and then I sat down. Nobody in that room needed me to explain it. 110 people who had been told for 4 months that a difficult neighbor was obstructing progress out of spite were now reading, in her own words, the moment she was warned and the moment she chose to threaten the person warning her, instead of checking a map that any of them could have pulled from the county website in 90 seconds. Graham Pike had come on his own without being subpoenaed or invited, and he asked to speak. He told the room that his firm builds around utilities constantly, that he had requested boundary and utility verification in writing on 2 occasions, that he had never been provided a septic map or a stamped survey, and that the plan he built from was a subdivision landscaping drawing with no surveyor's seal on it. Then he added the detail that finished it. When he raised the parcel question the second time, he was told in writing to proceed and that any further delay would be treated as a contractual failure on his part. He had that email. He had brought a copy for the board. A board member named Ruth, who had been on that board for 9 years and had voted yes on the project, asked the first real question of the night. "Valerie, did you know?" Valerie began a long answer about correspondence volume, reliance on professionals, and the good of the community. Ruth let her get about 40 seconds into it and then interrupted with the version that actually mattered. "Did you know before we spent $280,000? The room went completely silent, and Valerie Kincaid, who had never once in my experience failed to have an answer, said nothing at all. That silence satisfied me more than the settlement did, and I know exactly why. I did not defeat her. What broke her was that the people who had handed her the gavel finally read the paperwork themselves. Ruth's question was not mine. It belonged to 110 neighbors who had believed a confident woman over a documented fact and learned, in public, what that had cost them. I sat with my hands in my lap and let it happen without adding a word. And then, from the back of the clubhouse, where she had been standing quietly for the entire meeting with her folder under her arm, Marissa Boone said, in a completely ordinary voice, "Actually, there's one more issue." Every head in the room turned. Marissa walked to the front, declined the microphone, and laid out what her investigation had produced over the preceding 3 weeks. The association had committed 2 separate and independent violations, she said, and people kept confusing them. The first was construction over an approved septic disposal area without environmental health clearance, which is a public health violation regardless of who owns the ground. The second was construction outside the boundaries of the parcel on which the association held title, which is a property matter, not a health matter, and which the county does not adjudicate. 2 problems, 2 sets of consequences. And then she came to the third thing, which was the one nobody in that room had considered. She held up the permit application file the association had submitted for the project. The site plan filed with that application depicted both tennis courts, the lighting, and the spectator pad as lying entirely within association common property, not partially, entirely. The recorded survey demonstrated that roughly 38% of the constructed footprint lay inside my parcel, which meant, she said, that the permit issued for this project was issued in reliance on a site plan that did not accurately represent the location of the work. That is not a boundary dispute between neighbors. That is a defective application. Whatever was built under that permit was, in the county's view, never actually permitted at all. The county's requirements followed in a list she read from a single page, and every item landed like a stone in still water. The courts and pad were closed indefinitely, not pending appeal. The association would retain an independent licensed engineer and a licensed surveyor, both approved by the county, at association expense. All construction within my parcel and within the disposal and reserve areas would be removed, not modified, not drained, removed. The septic system and disposal field would be restored to a permitted, functioning condition. And my system would have to pass a full county inspection before the closure order on the remaining area could be lifted at all. What I asked for through Nathan was not a punishment. I asked for the full cost of restoring the septic system and disposal field. The pumping invoices I had paid for 4.5 months, which by then totaled just over $5,000. Elliott Shaw's engineering fees, reasonable attorney fees, rescission of the $250 violation notice, and a written withdrawal of the nuisance allegation. Restoration of the lawn, the fence line, and the mature pear tree their excavator had taken out in the first week. Nothing for my time. Nothing punitive. Nothing about Valerie personally. The carrier settled in 11 weeks. The association's insurance covered a substantial portion. The association covered the remainder through a special assessment that worked out to roughly $940 per household, and the contractor's own carrier contributed after Graham's documentation established that his firm had requested verification and been overruled in writing. In the third week of that process, the board voted to request Valerie Kincaid's resignation as president 7 months before her term expired. She resigned in a 2-paragraph letter that thanked the community for the opportunity to serve and did not mention tennis septic systems or me. No police, no confrontation, no shouting on anyone's lawn. She had built the case against herself, one email at a time, and then signed it. The machines came back in November. I heard them at 7 in the morning, and I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee in the cold to watch, because I had earned that much. A saw truck first, cutting the asphalt into panels along a chalk line laid out by a licensed surveyor with a stamp on his drawings, which was the first time in the entire history of this project that anybody had put a real line on that ground before touching it. Then loaders taking 11,000 square feet of a $280,000 amenity out in dump trucks, load after load, from directly above my number 2 lateral. They started, by pure coincidence, at the center service line of Court 2, the exact patch of asphalt where Valerie had stood in a cream blazer with her arms open for the newsletter photograph. I watched the breaker put a hole through it at about 8:40 in the morning. Around 9, she drove past my house on her way out of the neighborhood, slower than usual, and she did not look at me once. I did not wave, and I did not smile. There was simply nothing left to say to her. I stood there in the cold and watched strangers peel a mistake off of my land, one panel at a time. The new drain field passed inspection in March, 4 months and 9 days after the first saw cut. Marissa Boone signed the final approval herself. The rebuilt system sits in a redesigned configuration across the same rear area with a properly recorded reserve zone, and the ground above it came back in fescue, and by June you could not tell from my kitchen window that anything had ever happened back there, except that the grass was greener than it had been in 6 years. Briar Glen still has tennis. 1 court, not 2, rebuilt entirely on association common property, on ground that a licensed surveyor staked and a licensed engineer signed off on before a single truck arrived. The new board passed one rule that mattered more than the court did. No project above a set dollar threshold may proceed without a current stamped boundary survey, all applicable permits including utility and environmental clearances, a documented utility and infrastructure review, and a recorded board approval in the minutes with the vote of each member listed by name. Ruth asked me to run for the board that spring, twice, and I said no both times, not out of bitterness. It was that, after 11 months of watching one person decide her vision of a neighborhood outranked the paperwork beneath it, I did not trust myself to hold that gavel and stay a different kind of person than Valerie Kincaid. All I ever wanted was to be left alone on the land I bought. Marissa came out that final afternoon to sign the last form on the hood of her vehicle, and afterward she looked at the new grass the way people in this work look at ground that functions properly again. She asked me whether I was going to put up a fence across the back now. I told her no, I did not need one, and I pointed at the 4 white survey caps set in the corners of my parcel, freshly monumented, recorded at the county, and paid for by the association as part of the settlement. Now they know where the line is, I said. She laughed once, got in her vehicle, and drove out past the single remaining court. I stayed out there a while after she left. Somewhere behind the tree line I could hear a ball going back and forth on the new court, that hollow double knock, and kids arguing about a line call, and it sounded exactly like the thing Valerie said she wanted for this neighborhood and could have had in the first place for the price of one survey. Valerie Kincaid once told me I should learn my place. In the end, she spent nearly $300,000 of other people's money finding out precisely where my place was, and it turned out to be exactly where the county said it had been for the last 19 years.